Hello, my name is Doug Gibson, and we're at the Junction Theater in Ogden. This is the Plan9Crunch blog podcast. I'm Doug, and this is Steve Stones, who is a local artist, and he's also a professor at Weber State. And this is Pat Nielsen, who under the name Dean Patrick writes the Tara Drake series of novels, among other stuff. And we're going to talk to him too. But what we're going to do today, this is the first one, is we're going to talk about some movies, just let you know, learn about some great films, and then we'll spend some time with Pat talking about his novels too. And we're very grateful for John Miles of One Ogden Podcast for helping us today. Now, first movie I'm talking about is 1963, The Haunting. That is directed by Robert Wise, and he was helmed by Val Lewton, who made those great RKO films in the 1940s like Cat People. And anyways, The Haunting, what I love about it, it's a haunted house movie where nothing really violent ever happens, and there's no like jump shocks that you see in films today, but it scares the hell out of you literally. There's this house, and it's based on a Shirley Jackson novel, where the house has claimed people, either through dying in accidents or committing suicide, and he gathers 4 people to come to stay in the house for a few days and try to get the vibes of it. And one of those people is a woman named Eleanor, and she has a lot of dysfunction in her life. She's not appreciated by her family. And what's interesting is she took care of her mother, and because when her mother was trying to get help from her mother died. And what's interesting is in this house, one of the residents who stayed in this house all their life was trying to get help when she died. And anyway, so the house seems to have this deep attraction to Eleanor. At night, you'll just hear laughing, giggling, sobbing, doors being knocked upon. But Weiss is able to develop a lot of fear through focusing on the house as almost a key character. And there's one scene where Eleanor's with one of the other persons who's played by Claire Bloom. I can't recall her name right now. And they're frightened because of all this stuff happening in the house. And Eleanor is asking her companion who came into the room with her to stop gripping her so tight, okay? You can tighter, and suddenly she realizes that she's there by herself. Her companion's on the other side of the room, so something's been grabbing her. Other areas of this film that are really scary are a classic staircase that winds through, and it causes some problems too. People have died there. There's also a nursery where it gets much, much colder. And the director of the whole expedition, who's played by Russell John, I can't remember his name.
Tamblyn.
Yeah.
Russ Tamblyn.
No, it's not Russ Tamblyn. That's the younger one.
Yeah.
But his wife comes. She's a skeptic, and she spends the night in that nursery, and they can't find her for a long time. So The Haunting is a really good movie. Don't see the 1999 remake. It's crap. But see the 1963, directed by Robert Wise. If you have Turner Classic Movies, it pops up 3 or 4 times. I want to throw out any discussion now. If Steve or Pat have any kind of comments they want to make.
Does it follow the Shirley Jackson novel almost to a T?
Yeah, quite a bit. In fact, Mike Flanagan.
The novel, it has that type of dread throughout.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the Mike Flanagan series on Netflix.
I did not.
It's not as good, but it has that same kind of vibe.
And the novel's called The Haunting of Hill House,
right.
If I remember right.
Yes.
And there was a series on that novel also
that was
made.
the Mike Flanagan one for Netflix.
Okay, and he did 6 or 7 episodes of that. I didn't see that. Was that?
It's good. I don't think it has the effect of the 63 version movie. Whatever walks there, walks alone is the big thing.
Okay.
And they're always trying to get new people. And Eleanor is drawn to that place, even if she's having the hell scared out of her.
Interesting.
Well, you know, what I find to be one of the more scarier elements of the film is when the psychiatrist, the guy that's conducting the study in the house, the actor's name is Johnson, I believe.
Russell Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, he when his wife arrives, she suddenly disappears, and then they can't find her for a considerable amount of time. And then towards the end of the movie, she just appears outside as if she's been wandering.
Exactly. I don't want to give away the climax, but you're right. She's in that climax scene.
Interesting.
So anyways, if you want to see another movie that's really good about haunted houses, you should see The Legend of Hill House. We can talk about that sometime, made in 1973. Okay. It's not quite as good as The Haunting. Now, my second movie is one people probably know about. It's 1978 Halloween from John Carpenter. It ushered in...
one of the best.
Yeah, the so-called slasher series.
Right.
But the slasher series went really downhill, where you'd have young kids having sex getting killed, okay? Carpenter uses something called foregrounds to scare the hell out of you. And I'll give an example. Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, is finding all her friends dead in
Right.
the house as we're getting to the last 20 or 30 minutes of the film. And she's walking toward the stairs. And this is what Carpenter does so effectively. He shows Michael Myers, the slasher killer, behind her. And it takes a couple of seconds for Myers to do something, all right?
Right.
But
He slowly rises. And then approaches.
It makes you scared to death from watching
does.
it. It builds up your fear. Now, in movies like The Conjuring, which are really good, they have like shock scares.
Yeah.
And shock scares are great, but they're more for giggles when you're over.
Carpenter's not for giggles.
Carpenter, Ebert said that Carpenter is Halloween's the most violent film you've ever seen. And maybe from 1978 that was true.
It could have been true.
Because it was really, really
But there's
violent.
not a single drop of blood in that movie.
Yeah,
in-
there
in
isn't.
Halloween.
You're right. And also, one more thing that's very important about a horror film is Carpenter develops the characters played by P.J. Souls, Nancy Loomis, and of course Jamie Lee Curtis, and you care about them.
Yes, you do, just like The Thing.
Yeah, the thing. So when they die, it increases the terror because somebody you care about is actually dying.
Right.
And Michael Myers is like a little kid. Because in the beginning of the movie, both those films, by the way, The Haunting and Halloween, have great prologues too, by
Right.
the way. So Michael Myers is like a 21-year-old man who still has the body of a 6-year-old boy, or still the mind of a 60-year-old. So he plays little practical jokes. Like he scares P.J. Souls, who's having sex with her boyfriend. After he killed him, he dresses up like him in the.
Right. And
So-
it becomes more and more desperate.
Yeah, there are two great horror films in the latter half of the 20th century, and one is Night of the Living Dead, and the other one is Halloween because they revolutionized the genre.
Agreed.
And both, unfortunately, had mimicking films that decreased, and even
It decreased in power.
even the sequels to Halloween got bad, but they weren't done by Carpenter.
No.
That is a really good film. Any comments you guys want to make on
Well,
this?
I was going to say that when I was listening to the audio commentary for the original 1978 Halloween, and it was commentary with director John Carpenter. He was saying that when he did test screenings for the film, he didn't play his own music over the top of the film, and audiences didn't respond to it as intensely
So they laid in after?
as they did after he put the music.
I should have
onto
mentioned it
the-
has one of the great scores.
It
The
does
Oh,
have
absolutely.
soundtrack is
Dun 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 dun.
It-
Yeah,
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, it's
that's
really good.
it became as famous as Jamie Lee Curtis.
So in
the
a
soundtrack
sense, the
did.
music is also a character too, and
Yeah.
it's an effective aspect of the film because if you take the music out, it's like
the
it's a little
power's
bit-
gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Jaws, take out that,
Oh,
it would just be a normal
absolutely.
Oh yeah, you have to have
shark,
great-
shark documentary.
Also, Jamie Lee Curtis is a real kid. I mean, she's
She is.
singing love songs to herself and stuff like that.
But at the end, when she goes through such trauma, I think she pulls in a real scream. You can
Yeah.
feel that she was terrified.
Yeah, we haven't said that Donald Pleasance is the best creature hunter since Edward Van Sloan and Dracula. He's really good. But her last line to him is, "Was it the boogeyman?" And he goes, "I think it was." Or, as a matter of fact, it was. And you see he's gone.
As a matter of fact, it was.
Christopher Lee turned down that role.
He did. Maybe he, should have
He
taken
was
it.
offered that role before Donald Pleasance,
I
and he
didn't
turned
know that.
He turned it down.
Pleasance
And
was
I can't
perfect.
imagine seeing it without Pleasant in
Donald
it.
Pleasance,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to turn the time over to Steve to talk about two of his films. All right.
You know, there's so many great films out there in film world and in the history of cinema that sometimes it's difficult to select two. But often when people ask me what's your favorite movies of all time, I have to tell them the 1920 silent German expressionist film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and also the original 1978 George Romero Dawn of the Dead. You know, Dawn of the Dead is the ultimate 70s movie because it came about at a time when indoor shopping malls were a huge part of American culture.
Yeah, they were.
And when you consider the opening frame of the film, it just shows a close-up of red shag carpet with the title printed over the top of the carpet. So it's like a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the film because we think of red as violent. So
Right.
he really ups the violence and the gore in this film in contrast to, say, Night of the Living Dead. And you really cheer for the main characters in the film, or at least I do. You really you want them to survive, and they all have different code names that they call each other in the film. And as I mentioned, being that it takes place inside of a shopping mall, it really makes some commentary about consumerism, because I think George Romero is really making the comment that even when we're brainless, mindless zombies, we still have a desire to want to flock to the shopping mall.
And the zombies act like shoppers.
Absolutely.
For a type of comfort.
Exactly. And
you're enclosed in a place, there's some kind of safety.
George has often said that his zombies are not necessarily scary in this film. They're more of a parody of themselves.
I agree with that.
When he gets to Day of the Dead, the zombies even become much more graphic and violent. But this film, they're more of a parody of themselves. And so, if you really think about it, if we were all in a situation, a post-apocalyptic situation where we had to fight for our survival, it makes sense that we would all want to go and barricade ourselves into a shopping mall.
Or at the movie theater.
Secure. You know that Monroeville Mall is where they filmed that? And the 50th anniversary is this year, and they're going to show Dawn of the Dead in theaters, and they're going to show it at the Monroeville Mall, too.
Oh, absolutely. I consider Dawn of the Dead to be the Citizen Kane of zombie movies.
Really?
I mean, really.
That's quite a call on that. I like that.
Steve, I have a question for you. Did Dario Argento make a slightly different edited take
He
on
did. I have a box set of Dawn of the Dead, which I highly recommend for any collectors, any serious zombie fans, and it has a European cut, which some of the editing of it's a little bit strange, but we could also talk about the soundtrack by Goblin, which is an Italian rock band, which adds to the 70s flavor of the film.
Interesting. Does it give you? I would imagine it gives it a heavier undertone then, with that kind of music in the background.
Yeah, it's electronic synthesizer kind of music, so it's very bizarre, And Dario Argento, if my Italian's correct, I don't know if Argento or Argento.
I have no idea. Go ahead, go with it.
He, the fact that he's part of this film, he produced it and he marketed the film in European markets at the time that it came out.
Tell us about Caligari now.
Caligari, oh wow! If I could be a scholar of any film in the history of cinema, this is the film that I would want to be a scholar about. Is the the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, made in 1919, about the time of the ending of World War I.
The ending.
The ending of World War I, directed by Robert Wiene. It's considered a German expressionist masterpiece because it uses aspects of German expressionist cinema, such as the contrast of shadow and light to emphasize some of the killings in the film, some of the strange angular environments and props, the furniture, which tries to emphasize part of the insane aspect of the narrator's point of view in the film.
Define expressionism for us.
Expressionism, well, as I mentioned, in German expressionism, you have environments that are not naturalistic.
Right.
They're environments that express angularity, windows that are not perfectly upright, they're kind of sloped.
Hitchcock mastered that.
Oh, absolutely. And I would think that Alfred Hitchcock was greatly inspired by this film. I know Tim Burton is a huge fan of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I mean,
his films are the same.
Edward Scissorhands is really, I don't want to say a copy, but kind of an homage to the Conrad Veidt Sleepwalker, the somnambulist, in this film.
Interesting. Just a few years later, Nosferatu came out, which also
Two years later.
Exactly.
Another German expressionist film.
And it's a masterpiece of the vampire film, of
and
course.
it also uses the effects of light and shadow.
And shadows, it sure does.
Hitler kicked a lot of directors out.
Yeah, he did.
We got the benefit of them in the United States because the early Universals are very expressionistic, many of them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, the cinematographer on Caligari, I'm forgetting his name, he became the cinematographer for The Mummy with Karloff.
Is that Freund?
Did he, with Boris
Yes.
Karloff?
Carl Freund.
That's him.
Yeah.
He was the
Interesting.
cinematographer for The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, He went on to do a number of
He
Universal.
directed The Mummy, didn't he?
Oh yeah, you know what? He did. I was
Yeah,
thinking
he
he was
directed
the
The Mummy.
cinematographer.
And he was
but-
a cinematographer for Dracula too, I believe.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, hand it off to Pat. Are we
Yeah,
ready?
Pat is going to talk a lot about more contemporary films.
I am.
Because Steve and I need to learn more about these contemporary films.
Well, I'm appreciating the history too. I remember it back in film school, but it's coming to light now. I see it a lot in these.
Tell us about your film school background. I'm interested in hearing. Where
When I was at the University of Houston graduate school, I focused on literature, of course, and technical writing, which is what I do professionally. But I also studied film quite a bit, and I appreciated a lot of the films. We focused on Hitchcock. I studied quite a bit of Hitchcock. But the professor also looked at a lot more of the modern films of the late 80s and 90s. And I just appreciated the ability and the time to look at a film frame by frame and then be forced to write about it and kind of discuss how the film went in certain directions, how a director would pull in emotions from an actor. And so the fundamentals of it is very helpful when you go see a film and write about it, which I do quite a bit now. But the films I'd like to discuss are two of the past in this decade. And I think they're the very best two films of this decade. The first one I'll talk about is Infinity Pool, and that's directed by Brandon Cronenberg. Second one I'll talk about is Men, which is directed by Alex Gardner. And I picked these two films because I think they really hone in on how the world has become such a really wicked and bad place. And it has in so many ways. And I resonated with both these films because of my own background in alcoholism and addiction. These two films shatter you visually with what's going on, especially in Infinity Pool. I'll talk about that one first. Infinity Pool stars Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth. And I don't think if it wasn't for Mia Goth, the film wouldn't work. She takes over about a third of the way through. And she is the epitome of excess, addiction, sex, and alcoholism and drugs. So the film goes through this nightmarish plot where the character by Skarsgård he plays a writer who's been off his game for years. He's living off his wife's money. She's very wealthy. And he ends up meeting the Mia Goth character, and she takes them outside of the resort in a fictionalized country, but a heavily, heavily socialist, like communist country, where they break the rules and the laws. He ends up getting charged with murder of all things, and the punishment is to either be executed or to watch his clone himself be executed. That's where the fascination comes from, because there's a sci-fi element in it where Skarsgård is cloned, or doubled as they called it. And Mia Goth, we find out, has done this many times. Well, she takes over the film and she takes these characters through this hedonistic ride through the worst elements of mankind, whether it is sexual over-excess or psychedelic drugs or murder. She pulls in the audience that way, and it's just a film that goes right for the throat and never lets go.
You know, I'd like to watch, we all know that Brandon Cronenberg is David Cronenberg's
Yes.
son, okay? I'd like to watch Shivers again and The Brood from the 1970s, early David Cronenberg, then watch Infinity Pool and see if there's any similarities.
I think there are, and it's a good point, because in David Cronenberg's later films, like The Fly, for example, the body horror is what Cronenberg became famous for. Well, Brandon takes that, but he also has his own style, and he moves through it. And I think he's more visually stunning and alarming than his father was personally. Which kind of brings me into the second film, Men, which is directed by Alex Gardner. And this film, he was the director of Ex Machina and also Annihilation.
That's an excellent movie.
They're just tremendous films, and they're visually stunning, but they also are deeply disturbing on the human element. Men is really about, it takes the plot of a young woman who has had a shattering divorce. Husband committed suicide. She goes on this remote area in England, and she is, first of all, visited by the Rory Kinnear characters. And Rory Kinnear stars with Jessie Buckley. And Buckley is the same level of Mia Goth. I think these two actresses are the very best in horror today. But without Rory Kinnear in Men, ability to effortlessly move through 10 different characters.
That's incredible.
Just 10 of them, and they're all deeply disturbing. They get under your skin. There's a scene in Men where this Jessie Buckley character, she's trying to truly heal from this divorce. It's just seeing her husband commit suicide, jumping off of a building. She goes to this church, this remote church, and you instantly know that there's something wrong inside the church. Everything feels off. Everything feels brooding and dark. Well, when she leaves the church, she has a breakdown in it. She's walking outside, and she sees another Rory Kinnear character who plays a dwarfish-type kid, but with Kinnear's adult face, just alarming. But what's more deeply disturbing is the priest that he plays who comes to console Buckley. And they're sitting on a bench that's outside of the church, and he invades her slowly but surely, gains her trust, and shatters it by physically invading her, by putting his hand on her thigh and making the suicide of her husband more her fault. And she realizes right then and there that she's in a bad situation. She ends up in a barroom area where Kinnear plays 5 or 6 different characters in the bar, including the police officer who's there to protect her, ends up all being against her. The film is an overall, I think it's a display of just the annihilation of women altogether and what men have done to them. And it is just stunning in its visuals. So those are the 2 films I wanted to discuss, basically because in this decade, what we've seen in violence and excess and trying to understand where we are in the world right now.
There's a lot of anger out there, and these films are sort of underscoring that.
They underscore the anger. I think Infinity Pool just blasts anger from the start, and Mia Goth is just astonishing in it. Well, but you're right, with the undertones in Men and the repression of women, you can feel it grow.
When you were talking about cloning earlier, that kind of connects to this concern that we have now about artificial intelligence.
It does.
So is that something that you think's a big aspect of?
I do, and it's a great point because that's what I work on every day at my professional work. I work with AI in the headsets that combat soldiers wear. So I'm seeing artificial intelligence develop and increase exponentially each week in how the sophistication works. And we're talking about soldiers using it and being safe or safer in combat situations.
Okay, I want to talk about our friend Pat Nielsen, and he is the author of a series involving Tara Drake series. The first book is called The Lady Mephistopheles. The second one's called Tara Sabbath.
Tara Sabbath.
And I'm not done talking, but I want to tell you most of the stuff. What's the third one going to be called?
The Harlot and the Beast.
Harlot and the Beast. Your publisher is TWB Press.
TWB Press.
In Colorado. He is easily the top seller at that press.
It's been an honor for that. It really has.
He's involved a woman, and tell me if I'm wrong, but she's like the mythical wife of Adam.
She is. Some of her history is the mythical wife of Adam's first wife, Lilith.
Yeah, and she is taking over the world right now in the latter days. And basically her main antagonists are, in the first book, a former police officer, right?
The first book is actually a former, as a writer.
Oh, Rodney, he's a writer, right.
Alcoholic.
But his brother takes
is
over the mantra
yes, he
later.
does.
Tell us more about the Tara Drake series, all right?
A pleasure to do that. So the first book, like Doug was saying, The Lady Mephistopheles, focuses on Stephen Paul, who is a writer who discovers one night when he's coming home that there's this demonic presence in his home. Well, it ends up being this character I've created called Tara Drake. And she's basically the female Lucifer. And that Lady Mephistopheles is basically the female demon in the Greek mythology. But I've developed that more to where she is also, part of her is Adam's first wife. So I go biblically in it. And she does take over these latter days of evil. She is, for me, the representation of addiction. And I first created her, of all places, in a prison rehab. I wrote about her in a short story, and she developed into these books. And now I'm doing the third novel on it. And like you say, Stephen Paul's brother, Marion, is a police officer who wants to find out what happened to his brother. Character based on my own brother, Josh, in Houston, who's a detective who worked with the Houston Police Department. So I get a lot of legal background from him, but I found it just really exciting to have a police officer go after this demonic character and find out if he can take her on and win. And of course, there are ways to defeat evil. So it's this back and forth chess and cat and mouse game. There's a lot of characters.
We can't do justice right now, too. But I want to mention one thing because this was fun. I wish we had a copy of the first book, but tell us how you found the model for Tara.
That's a great story. So when the first book, when it was finished, and I was working with Terry Wright, he's the publisher at TWB Press, we had a few covers that he was thinking of and I was looking up, but it was my wife who looked at these covers and said they're too childish. They just don't do her justice. And she was at work, my wife Lisa was at work, and she was browsing around. She saw this one photograph of a goth model in Moscow, Russia, of all places. Well, she was perfect. She was Tara Drake. Her name is Alfia Malkana. She lives in Moscow. But to find her, I had to look at all of the Russian websites and try to get authorization to use her. I ended up finding her husband. And her husband wrote me back and said, we would be honored to have her on your cover. And so that's how she became the cover of the first book. In the second book, she did a whole photo shoot.
Yeah, she's perfect.
And she is Tara Drake. Yeah. So I've been able to, her photos are all on my website because she really is the look and feel of this character I created. But it was a fascinating story. We just didn't have the right one. And my wife found her. And to go back and forth across the world to get permission, of all things, was really something else, especially with the war going on now. It's just been incredible. Right?
It's
been something else.
TWBpress.com is the publisher.
Yeah.
You can also get them at Amazon.
At Amazon, Barnes & Nobles.
And do you have an author page there?
I do. Dean Patrick Hoare is my website.
Okay, that's your website, deanpatrickhore.com, but do you have an author page at Amazon?
I do. I have an author page at Amazon and at TWB
So
Press.
that will get you. Also, Tara Drake is also in a couple of short stories, at least one short story.
She is, called She.
Yeah, you've had several short stories published also.
Right.
And I want to say that Plan9Crunch is PLANNINE. Yeah, Plan9Crunch, CRUNCH, sorry. Plan9Crunch.blogspot.com. We may change that in the future. I'd like to get a better website. But Dean's books have been reviewed in there. Steve and I have written hundreds of reviews. And we hope to keep doing this. We're grateful also. John, what are your favorite horror films? Just throw out two or three. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I remember watching all the Nightmare on Elm Streets when I was young. That was
Me too.
first big. And the Children of the Corn.
Okay, those are fun.
Is that kid's name Malachi? In Children in the Corner? Yeah.
So, I also, there's one called The Dirties. It was very...
Oh, I haven't seen that. I got
very, very low budget.
The Dirties.
And it's about a kid taking revenge at a high school, so it's sort of horror, sort of not.
Okay.
But, I like that a lot.
Do you ever like, I know you like music, do you like Penelope Spheris films?
Oh, I don't know.
Decline and Fall of Western Civilization, the
Suburbia.
Suburbia.
Oh, Suburbia.
Yeah, we saw, Steve and I watched Suburbia yesterday. It blew my mind away, that film. Yeah.
Was it?
It's about punkers who live in, or squatting a house
When
in
did it come out?
California. 1984.
1984.
It's a powerful movie.
Oh, squatter films are terrifying.
I told my
There's
mom
a lot
the
of
first
them
scene, and she, not my mom, I told my wife, my wife's my mom. I told my wife the Suburbia's first scene, and she said, I'm never watching that film. Okay, it's got a pretty intense first scene. I don't want to give anything away.
Well, the ending's pretty intense.
The ending's pretty intense, too.
Wait, I said The Dirties. I meant The Signal. Have you seen
The Signal.
The
okay.
Signal.
Okay, yeah.
Like
I
Creep
haven't
Show.
seen
I
The
have seen
Signal.
The Signal. Yeah.
They're like short story films?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They just hear the thing and they go crazy.
Yeah.
I like The Signal a lot.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Oh, so we gave your address for TWB, right? We gave
TWB
your
Press, Dean Patrick Hoare.
DeanPatrickHoare.
Grateful to talk about the books with you. I
Great.
really am.
Well, I'm looking forward to reviewing the third book and having an interview with and everything. Plan9Crunch.blogspot.com. Check it out. And this has been the first podcast. We hope to have many more. Once again, thanks to One Ogden, John Miles, for his help. And that's
Thank you,
about
John.
anything else you guys want to say.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been great sitting here and discussing film with you. And
I think it's an important discussion because if it branches out into this to talk about books and how these characters can resonate with what's going on today, I think that's important, and I appreciate the chance of doing it together.
All right, great. That's a wrap. Thanks.
Thank you.